Okay, so a bunch of people have been asking how I do paper piecing. So it's pretty easy in the sense that I use just scrap pieces and then just kind of go from there. But I am not one to measure or anything like that. I just kind of eyeball it, and I have a big lamp right here next to me, and I use it to kind of like see through the paper and see if my fabric is covering up the piece that I want. So what I do is I'm going to line up my black, and you can see in there it's all covered up. So, and that would be my number 1 block. So I put that fabric on the back, and then I'm going to line up this with this one. Okay, so this gray is going on my number 2 block here, and what I want to do is make sure that my fabric is on the opposite side. So if I want my fabric to open this way, then an A2 should be on this side, and if I have my fabric on this side, then A2 should be on my right. So just think about flipping once you've sewn it. Just think about that, and that'll help you figure out which way to sew. So because A2 is over here, I put my gray on this side. I make sure that the line that's between the two, it covers both fabrics. So what I like to do is kind of just pull it back and just kind of look at the two fabrics to see if they're on that line, which they are. So this way when I sew, I'm not going to miss the fabric, and I won't have to do any seam ripping. So I've decreased my stitch length. I'm at a 2, which is kind of tiny, so, but I like a tiny one so when I'm ripping, I don't have to worry about tearing any seams. So I'm going to put my needle at the beginning of the line, and I actually backstitch when I first start. So I backstitch, and then I hit the end of the line, and I backstitch again. So I backstitch, and then I stitch across the line, and then I backstitch again. And this way it just, again, ensures that when I'm tearing the paper off, I don't lose my seam. So when you open it, you'll see that the gray is on my number 2 side, and my seam is correct, so there's no reverse seam there. So black is on this side, gray is on this side. Of course, I color mine so I know what color I'm supposed to be sewing, because looking at another piece of pattern or whatever and trying to figure it out is just too complicated for me. So I just end up using my little crayon box over here and coloring in all my pieces. Right now I'm just working with black and gray, but as you can see, so that's what I've done here. I just want to trim off the excess, so I do I don't really like precision cut. I'm kind of just like cut it and be done. So I'm going to put my finger over A2, and that's just going to tell me, like, you know, don't cut like anywhere near my finger so that I don't cut missing the block. So I've just used my finger as my guide, cut around it, and I know for sure it's going to cover my A2 piece. And then I'm just going to quickly iron it. And you can see that's nice and flat now. And that's A1 and A2. So my next one is A3, which is black. So here is my A3 block right here. Okay. So my fabric's on my left, so the block is on my right. I'm just showing you this because I did the other way last time, but I want to show you kind of both ways. So again, I'm going to line up this line, which is between A2 and A3, on my fabric, and I want to go overlap the fabric. I do not want to do it right on the edge of the fabric because you need to have room for that seam allowance. So again, my fabric's on this side and my block is on my right, which means when I stitch it, it's going to flip open onto the A3 side. So again, I am going to go forward, back, and then forward, back. And again, you see fabric's on this side, block is on that side. Now this is something a lot of people don't realize, but when you're just trimming off and making like little tiny pieces and scraps and you're using whatever you have, I always trim off the excess from the blocks prior. So I've just trimmed it off. I've now got just a nice clean seam, and you're just going to fold this back, and then you can see it covers my A3 block right here, and I've got a pretty good size here, so a piece of fabric here, so I know it's going to cover it. So doing my little trick where I put my finger in the way so I don't cut it any smaller than what I need. And then I can hold it up to my light and make sure that, of course, it's the right size. And then I'm going to press it once again. And so far I've got that. So now my A3 and then A4 is here, which is again a gray. So I'm going to go back to my gray. So A4 is on this side, fabric is on my left. I'm going to line up the line, and again I'm just guiding it with my eye. I'm not trying to be any precision cutting or anything like that. Okay, forward and back, forward and back. Trim off the excess. And I have like a little basket right here that I just toss my little scraps in so it doesn't end up all over my floor. Well, sometimes it does, but you know, that is what it is. Alright, so A4 is here, fabric is now on the correct side. I put my finger there, trim around it. Okay, and then give that a press. And now you're starting to see this little piece coming together. Okay, and then here's A5 is gray again. So again, I'm just going to line this up. Now, say you have a weird angle or something like that, you're trying to figure that out. I just kind of use my fingernail. I've got good fingernails here, so I just use my fingernail and I just kind of press along that line. So if I have just an odd size, which I do, it's kind of pointy, but I'm going to fold basically on that line. And here's my piece right here is A5 right there. So in order to see if I'm going to make it onto my scrap, you can kind of lay, this will be your seam because that's where you folded. So that's where my seam's going to be, but I want to make sure that this tail end lands on the fabric. So I'm just going to scoot it up a little bit more, and there you go. So now you know for sure it's going to land on this. Now this works really well if you have a small scrap piece, or even, you know, something tinier that you're trying to work with, something like this, and you're trying to get a little square in there or whatever. But this works well for that kind of stuff, or even if you have a really big odd size one. But so then I know where my seam is, I hold it in place, I put the paper back, and then stitch like you normally do on the line. Okay, trim the extra. So the nice thing about having like a little scrap bag right here next to me is that, so this piece is kind of tiny, I wouldn't really keep it, so to say, but if I throw it in my little bag here and not my trash can, then later on if I have like a really tiny corner that I need to do, I can kind of go through my little scrap bag here and grab it and then use it later. But right now I'm not going to keep it because I don't need it. So tossing that. So now I can pull this back and I can see exactly how that piece landed, and it was exactly how we folded it. So this one I can obviously see where my line is, so I don't need to use my fingers. Okay, so I've done that. Let's give it a press. Okay, so there I've done the press on it, and then we just have this big one right here, which is again gray. So see, so like this is an odd shape. I'm going to try and aim for this one right here, but I want to just double check and make sure that I'm going to make it. So again, I'm just going to use my finger and press along my line here. You can use, you know, like a ruler or whatever you have handy. My fingernails work great. So I'm going to make sure that this seam makes it on the fabric, which it does. So it's a long enough piece of scrap fabric, and then this is the piece that I'm trying to cover right here, and my fabric lands underneath it entirely. So I'm just going to pull that back and stitch it on. Now sometimes when I have like multiple seams, I'll back stitch across, because again, when I'm tearing, I don't want to pull any extra seams. So just trim off the extra and then press it back. And then give it a good press. And there you go, you have your piece. So my fabric entirely covers the piece of paper on the back. It's all covered, and then I will use my ruler to trim it up. That's how you paper piece.